Make sure everything's working on the recording. Yeah, marvelous. So we'll get started. Well, welcome, folks. Thanks for joining another episode of Digital Drams. I was talking to some of my colleagues in bottling, and we were hoping to get 2 more in before the end of the year, but then it'll be mad how quickly the year is gone. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name's Luke. I'm the W Club manager, and we do want to get as much of your comments and feedback in the chat, so keep it coming. And at the end, I'll be giving the discount code out for 15% off all the drams we're going to try tonight. So I hope you have your packs ready. But that's enough for me anyway. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself before we tuck into the whiskies?
All right, go on then. Hello, everyone. I'm absolutely honoured to be here at Digital Drams. My name's Mike. I'm the brand ambassador for Highland Park Whisky. I believe you've got 4 whiskies sent out in your pack, the 12, 15, 18, and our cask strength. I've been repping this whiskey now for just over a year. Those who are long-time followers, long-time fans of the brand may have noticed that we've gone through a little bit of a rebrand in the last couple of weeks. So I thought this would be a really good opportunity to kind of do a deep dive into the history of Highland Park, to kind of break down some of the production and some of the kind of elements that go into each individual expression. And we can also talk a little bit about the rebrand, what the motives behind it were, what it kind of represents for us kind of going forward, and how it all kind of really all harks back to our origins in the Orkney Islands. Doing these little sessions is such a good way of me getting feedback from you guys as well. So I'd always welcome you guys to drop your comments in the chat, drop your questions in the chat. Luke is my professional moderator for this evening. I'm very grateful to have one. But yeah, any questions you might have about the whiskies, about the brand, let me know. I'll do my very best to answer those. I would say we're going to go through a whole bunch of different stuff, but we should probably kind of crack into our first whiskey to start us off. I don't want people sitting there looking at their glasses, so I'm going to join you as well. So first whiskey of the evening is Highland Park 12. So here we have the new packaging. I've got a couple of the new bottles here in my slightly cold, wintry living room at the moment, but Highland Park 12. This was one of the first age statement single malts our distillery ever released back in 1979. Prior to that, we had done an 8-year, but nothing beyond that. At the time of its release, this was the oldest single malt we had ever released. Since then, our stable has somewhat widened. We now do a 15, an 18, up to 21, 25, 30, and even beyond that. But the 12 really remains a cornerstone of the brand. It is the kind of basic kind of profile around it is the kind of basic DNA that runs through the rest of the whiskies you'll be tasting today. So 12, 15, 18 certainly have a common thread throughout. Cask strength is a little bit of a different beast, and we can kind of come to that at the end, I think, because it's kind of sits apart from the rest of these. But we're going to start with the 12. I have brought myself my own little branded Highland Park glass to join you, because it's not going to be a digital dramming if I don't also get to dram. Exactly. But in the chat, is there anyone who hasn't had this whiskey before? This is a bit of a ubiquitous whiskey, kind of a staple for many years. I know when I first started out at this point decades ago in the bar industry, this was on most back bars. I think probably one of the first half dozen whiskeys I ever tried, along with a few other single malt staples. It was definitely something that's I've had a long-term relationship before I even started working with the brand. Is anyone's first time enjoying Highland Park? Do let me know.
Do get that comment.
That was your catch. The bottle I poured was a 15, yeah.
So you're cheating, Mike.
I'm going to check if the 15-year-olds is in the 12 box. They're mixed up. Perfect. I'll have two.
Well spotted, Bob. That's very good. And just to confirm, so I should have, this is my fault. The bit of housekeeping I always forget at the start. A lot of the drammers on like to get pre-poured. So we are, just to confirm, we are going to go 12, 15, 18, and then cask strength, yeah?
Yeah, I think that was a really good way to go. Always good to kind of go up in age. You can kind of see the progression of the whiskey as it gets more cask influence. And the cask strength, our cask strength in particular, is quite a fiery release. It's non-age statement. It is very high ABV. So I think it's always a really good way to end. You kind of work your way up some of these older whiskies. You see some of the more cask, the influence of the cask. And then you move into cask strength, you see a little bit more of the kind of intrinsic, punchier, slightly rawer elements of the spirit. I'm not going to teach anyone to suck eggs. You guys have probably done this before. You know well how to taste a whiskey. What I would say is aroma first, always get a nice nose. It really helps you pick out the different elements from the whiskey. I do a lot of these tastings, and for those who are probably far less familiar than you, what I tend to do is take a leaf out of the book of sommeliers or wine tasters and try and break whiskey down into its constituent parts. So often I'll do whiskey tastings with quite new whiskey drinkers, and when I say, what does this taste like? They go, it tastes like whiskey, which I can't blame them for. That's bang on the money. But when it comes to picking apart what makes each of these ones unique and the particular personalities of these whiskies, we need to go a bit deeper. So fruit, spice, flower, and I would say other. In whiskey, that's mostly going to be the smokier, earthier elements to it. If you can pick out different kind of specific notes for each one of these, it's going to give you a really good idea of the character of the whiskey as a whole. So going for a little smell and then for the palate as well. I remember one quite seasoned whiskey rep once told me that when it comes to single malts, you're meant to hold it on your palate for as many years as there is in the bottle in terms of seconds. So if it's a 12-year-old, you hold it for 12 seconds. If it's a 15-year-old, you hold it for 15 seconds. I looked up to this person and thought there was a lot of wisdom in that. That was until I had a 40-year-old whiskey and I pretty much burnt my palate. I couldn't taste anything for a week. But suffice to say, you don't want to shoot it down. You want to savor it a little bit. Let it wash over the palate. Let it coat the tongue. That's the only way you're going to really start to pick out the specific elements of the whiskey itself. So
I find that's great advice for people who don't like drinking whiskey. Whenever I give friends and family, I was doing a distillery visit of Dingston recently, and with some family members, and they were like, oh, I don't drink whiskey. I can't, it was like nervous to approach the glass, which no one on this call is going to be. But the kind of the shock to the system and the burn is far less actually when you do it. So if any of you are trying to get your family members into whiskey, that kind of second rule, I think it takes the edge off the whiskey and maybe prepares people. They find less of a shock. So yeah, boring digression, but there you go. Dom has said, I'm fairly new to Highland Park, so haven't tried. So sorry, so not sure if I've tried these expressions before. It's quite funny it's fruity on the nose. Orchard fruits with some caramel for me. And
yeah, for sure.
Spent quite a few sessions at the distillery. Sister-in-law is an Orcadian. Great place to visit. James, a legend on tour.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. So orchard fruits for sure, caramel for sure. Highland Park is quite a sweet single malt, I would say. Some people in tastings are hesitant to say that out loud, like it's an insult. I actually think it's one of the best things about it because it's quite sweet, it's quite rounded. You definitely get that with a 12. And actually, as you move up the age statements, that sweetness remains. It just starts to get tempered a little bit by the qualities of the cask. Wood has not only a lot of flavor, it contains some tannins as well. Tannins is what makes red wine taste quite dry. It's what causes tea to give you that kind of puckering sensation. It's also present in oak and it's present in bark. So it leaches into the whiskey and tends to dry it out. When you start with a nice sweet spirit, that dryness creates a really, really nice balance. But with a 12, what you have is something quite sweet, quite rounded. Definitely some honey notes in there. That's a super common note. Orchard fruits I see. I get a little bit of stone fruit as well. I'm not sure if anyone else is picking that out. Someone says cereal, white pepper for sure. Jam and cream is a good note. I like that a lot.
Jam and cream is an excellent note, yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's a kind of baking spice note there as well, which is definitely coming more from the cask than anywhere else. Kind of cinnamony, nutmeg, often gets equated to something akin to Christmas cake. But yeah, delicious little dram.
No, definitely good Christmas cake and sweet and rounded. It's like Santa Claus. But the sorry, that was a bad joke. But the but it's definitely a gorgeous dram. The price on our website at the moment is £46, but with your discount code you get it for 39. So not too bad. And that'll also net you, for those of you who are trying to do the maths, 156 W Club reward points to redeem against your next purchase. So there's always that bonus too. Marvelous.
Yeah, nice. I think also what makes us really unique is where we're from. So Highland Park, the distillery, is located in the islands of Orkney. For those that haven't been, Orkney is a collection of about 70 islands. It's scattered off the very northern tip of the Scottish coastline. We're actually the most northerly malt distillery in all of Scotland, for now, at least. There are more popping up every day, but we are certainly the most ingrained of those northern malt distilleries. This isn't really a hub of whiskey production in the same way that Speyside is or Islay is. We're a little bit out on our own. And as we go through these whiskies, I'm going to kind of talk you through how that's actually affected the process and consequently the flavor of the different whiskies. But since I'm going to say that not many of you have been to Orkney, I know from experience touring around the UK and doing these tastings that although people sometimes make it out to the Islay Festival, sometimes hit the Lowlands or hit Speyside, very few people actually make that journey out to Orkney. I've got a few slides just to kind of show you a little bit about what that landscape is like, because I think words don't really do it justice. I've got some really nice photography, some from a professional photographer, some not so professional for myself when I went out almost at the same time last year. But look, if you could bring just them up just to give a little bit of point of reference, and I'll kind of talk you through. You can go back just
it's going forward, not back. Sorry,
yeah.
Messed up your presentation there. My apologies. I had one job.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. They got a sneak preview. Yes, so this is the visitor sign right in the distillery walls.
What they call in the business, Mike, subtle foreshadowing.
Yes, exactly. We've been making whiskey in Orkney now for over 226 years. The distillery there was founded in 1798. It's changed a little since then, but still a lot of the same architecture, still a lot of the same buildings, still rooted in a lot of the same traditions that founded that distillery back then. If you just move to the next slide, look. I said about 70 different islands. This is just a little snapshot of the coast of the mainland. So 70 islands, about 20,000 people living throughout all 70, most of them on what we call the mainland. If you live in Orkney, the mainland does not mean the mainland of Scotland. The mainland means the mainland of Orkney. Anything below that is pretty much just the south. It has a very, very deeply ingrained, quite independent, quite insular community. They're very proud of their own identity. A lot of people don't realize, but Orkney wasn't really part of the Scottish kingdom until about the 15th century. That's a good few hundred years after a lot of the other islands. They have kind of an outsider mentality that kind of like really, when you visit, you really find they have a very unique kind of individual approach to who they are, and they're very proud of that. Just skip to the next one, look.
Yep.
This is the cliffs of Yesna Bay, so it's just on the western coast. When I went out there this time last year, it was December, or just about to hit December, bitterly cold. The winds in Orkney can hit up to 100 mile an hour in the winters. It's prone to storms. It can be very changeable. It sits very exposed between the Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea, but consequently has this very remote, very rugged, very weather-worn landscape, these amazing cliffs that have been carved out by the Atlantic waves. There's almost no trees in Orkney. The winds are genuinely too fierce. I was there when I was there last year. One of the guys took me on a tour around, and we went through the Central Valley in mainland of Orkney, and he unironically turned to his left and he was like, "That's the Great Forest of Orkney," and it was about 11 trees. So yeah, it can seem quite barren, but it's a very beautiful place as well. And you skip
That
to the
that
next
that,
one.
that maybe ties in with a question we have in the chat there.
Oh,
If you don't
sorry.
mind me interrupting,
Yeah,
about
for
we've
sure.
got a few great ones which I'm not ignoring, folks. We will come to. But there was a question there about local barley, about distilling, about growing barley on there. In terms of what you talk about, the wind speeds and the kind of environment, is that possible even, or do you know if
So
that's
I mean, barley was certainly grown there before, and there would have been a time in our history where we used local barley. I mean, in the early part of the 19th century, we weren't really importing much, if anything, from the mainland. As it stands today, no, not so much. We get ours from the mainland. What we focus on in terms of point of origin a lot more, which I'll come to in a little bit, is the peat. So peat is very much can impart very different qualities on the whiskey depending on where you harvest it from and the exact process in which you smoke it and infuse the malt with those flavors. So what you harvest in Islay is not the same as what you harvest in the Highlands, the other islands in Orkney. So that really affects it. The barley, I'm sure as well, will have an effect. But for us, with the kind of amount of output we do, there isn't really capacity to do that on Orkney at the moment. It's quite quite disparate, the islands. There is good land there, but there's certainly not the area of land to produce the amount of barley we would need to make our malt solely from that. Whether there might be some projects in the future experimenting with different barley types, that is something that I wouldn't totally put off the table, but nothing in the current range really drills down into that. We're much more focused on our peat and our casks more than anything else. Cool. Couple of shots I took from last time I was up there. Really beautiful place. If anyone does get the chance to go out to Orkney, you can fly straight from Edinburgh on a little 50-seater kind of propeller plane from Logan Air. Not what I would necessarily recommend if you're a nervous flyer, but is a lovely flight when you descend into the islands itself. And then we skip on to the next. And it's not just rugged waves. We also have some beautiful, amazing monuments. A lot of people don't realize, but there have been people living on Orkney now for in excess of 6,000, 7,000 years. These standing stones here of Stines are on record the oldest Neolithic monument in British Isles, older than Stonehenge, older than the pyramids of Giza. It's hard to imagine people landing on the Orkney Islands today, all those millennia ago, and really settling. It can be such a harsh climate in the winter, but in summer is a very beautiful place, and it really is very fertile land. And in those times, they would have had an abundance of sea fish or abundance of fish and the seas to fish from. So it would have been a very very conducive to settlement. And then you go into the next one. This place is called Skara Brae. So I visited this in December. This again is beautifully preserved settlement. I think it is from 5,500 BCE, so it's nearly 8,000 years old. It was uncovered in one of the many storms that hit Orkney back in the 1960s, I believe, 1950s, 1960s. And it was beautifully preserved beneath the dunes. It's now a heritage site. You can go and walk around and see exactly what those little stone settlements were like. But it's really amazing it gives you a real impression of how deep the history goes in Orkney. It's very far away. It's quite sparse. It's certainly not a cosmopolitan destination, but there's so much kind of rooted in those islands, and there's such an insular kind of heritable community to explore. It's a really interesting aspect.
No, it definitely sounds it. We've got some great. I mean, Roger said in the chat there, the archaeology is amazing. On the barley, Jamie said, isn't beer barley or brie barley.
Beer
Links to
barley.
Orkney. And Andrew says beer barley is from Orkney and copes best with harsh environments, used in some Islay whiskies. Yes, Bruichladdich for sure, says Jamie. The Bobs has been to Orkney just once, but it was a day trip around the whole island. Never visited the distillery. On the list for a few for future trips for sure. Whiskey Slayer said had a few odd days in Kirkwall. Then I was on standby when sorry, when I can't read tonight, when I was on the standby vessels, but must admit it was a bit of a blur. We've also got some taste notes there. Tom, who's been A1 with the taste notes the last few sessions. It says the mouthfeel is creamy, tending to drying. It's lighter than I expected. There's apples, honey, sweetness, there's apples, honey, sweetness, and a touch of light spice in the palate. I'm picking up a nice citrus, or origine, orange in the finish. Very easy drinking. I need to work on my literacy
I
between.
think another whiskey will help, though. Don't
But
worry.
that was I was literally going to say maybe another whiskey will
Yeah.
jog me. So
Well,
maybe we should move
let's.
on now to the 15. Would that be a good idea?
Yeah, for sure. Let's crack on. I'll get the right bottle this time. So 15. Cool. So it starts life as the exact same spirit as the 12. It is peated using Hobsturmer peat that we harvest exclusively from Orkney. It's 100% malted barley, obviously. Comes off our stills at about 69.8% ABV. Where it really starts to depart is cask maturation, not just how long it's been matured, but in the specifics of the cask itself. So, have a little dram.
I'll come on to the next slide while you're doing that.
Yeah, of course. Let's
look at this lovely heather.
Some lovely heather. And if you go to the next one as well, that's Scapa Flow. So just on the western coast, adjacent to the distillery itself, and next to a not unknown other Orkney distillery. And if you leave it on that one just now, we'll go into the whiskey. 15 years old, whereas the 12 had certainly got a lot of spice, a lot of orchard fruit, and a lot of honey. I think this one is a little bit bolder, a little bit more complex, maybe even a little bit brasher in some ways. I'd be interested to see what you guys pick up on the palate and on the nose. But bottled at 44% ABV. Whereas the 12 is, whereas the core range is matured predominantly in sherry casks of various sizes and wood types. The 15 has considerably more American oak in it. Now, that's not American oak in the sense of ex-bourbon. That's American oak that we've brought over to the south of Spain, to the cooperages and the bodegas there, to toast it, cut it, turn it into barrels, and season it with sherry. So it's still sherry casks, but there's a higher proportion of American oak. And it's going to give it a slightly different profile to the 12 and the 18. European oak tends to lean a bit more spice heavy, a little bit more dried fruits, a little bit darker flavors. 15, lighter, creamier, more vanilla. There's citrus there, but whereas in the 12, it tends to lean orange. I find with this, it's a little bit more lemony. Maybe some tropical fruits in there as well. Pineapple is a big tasting note. I tend to get a little bit mango as well. Sweet vegetable aroma.
Yeah, it's definitely drier than the 12 for me personally. It's really interesting. There is that kind of that citrusness in there as well. Roger says nose in the 15 is a sweet vegetable aroma with citrus edge. Big jump in the flavor. The extra 4% AVB has a difference. Less fruit on the nose than the 12 and more caramel or maple syrup, says Dom. Bob says, are the new rebranded 12 and 15 and 18-year-old the same liquid as the old Viking bottles packagings?
Yes, identically the same. So we're not changing the range, and that extends through not just the 12, 15, 18, but also to the kind of basic elements of our limited releases and all our older age statement stuff as well. So the core range changed just over a month ago now, officially in the UK market. I just hosted a launch event in Edinburgh last week, actually, in the W Hotel, which was amazing. and it is a new look and it is a new aesthetic direction, but we are still maintaining the exact same traditions and style of liquid as before. There are a lot of reasons for this. We found that although that the Norse and the Viking mythology has served us really well, it's quite restrictive in what you can do with the whiskey. We found that some people were interpreting the brand as being more about the bottle design than about the actual liquid that was going in it, which is very far from the truth. And in terms of recruiting a new generation of whiskey drinkers, which is really critically important to what we do, it was a bit of a barrier there as well. So we wanted to create something that was a bit sleeker, a bit more modern, a bit more adaptable, and ultimately something that paid, something that kind of turned its eye not to how Orkney was a couple of hundred years ago, but to where Orkney is now. Because at this juncture, we have been making whiskey on Orkney for a couple of hundred years, but we're also turning our eyes towards the future, what that means for the whiskey industry, what we want to do in the next century, and how we kind of represent that with the design and the layout of the bottles. So if you look at the bottles themselves, you'll notice that the ornate braiding that we kind of associated with that kind of Viking imagery has been removed. We do still have this kind of central emblem, which is the Highland Park emblem, and beneath that an engraving that states product of Orkney. The logic being there that we're still very much embedded in the kind of culture and the provenance of those islands. We want to really, really celebrate that. We recognize that we don't really quite belong to Islay or Speyside or mainland whiskey. So we're very proud of the fact that we have continued and championed kind of our Orkney heritage for this long. And then the labels, we want to go something a bit lighter. We've had a very dark and kind of brooding image for a very long time. So opening up to a lighter style, which I'm not sure if you can quite pick up on the cameras here. It's white, but it's flecked with lilac. That lilac is a reference to the heather that blooms across Orkney. As we'll get to just a little bit with the 18, the heather is a big part of what gives our peat its very particular profile. So, like I said, all peat is not the same. In Islay, it tends to be made up of a lot of seagrass, a lot of fungi, a lot of coastal vegetation, such as that. In the Highlands, you wouldn't know to drive through it today, but thousands of years ago, the Highlands would have been covered in pine forest. It was called the Caledonian forest. The huge temperate, essentially a rainforest, quote unquote. Very little of that remains today, but it is still in the peat deposits that you find on the mainland itself. So they have more of a wood smoke kind of barbecue flavor. On Orkney, we get all of our peat from a stretch of land called Hobster Moor. It is coastally facing. There's no trees whatsoever, and likely never have been, considering the winds that is exposed to. What there is there's a big carpet of heather that covers the land. Heather, very low-lying, very hardy in winter, and then blooms pink and purple in summer. The way peat is formed, layer after layer after layer, this is broken down, decomposed, and very gradually, generation after generation, century after century, millennia after millennia, makes its way down into these peat deposits. So we have this kind of heather-infused peat that is very specific to us. We don't use any other peat. Nobody else out of the 148 distilleries in Scotland use that kind of peat. And because of that, it gives us a slightly different profile. We're certainly not peaty in the way that an Islay is peaty. We're not peat bomb. The analogy I always use is that of salt. There's salted foods. There's food that is very salty, chips, crisps, stuff that's good while you're on a night out, good while you're on a hangover. And there's food with salt in it, where the salt is just kind of bringing the other elements together, creating a sense of balance. Nothing that's like overly forceful. It's just kind of creating a kind of cohesive palate for the whiskey. That's really kind of our approach. It has been for the last 100 odd years. You can taste. I have been fortunate enough to taste kind of vintage Highland Parks. And although some of them skew slightly more peated, there's still that kind of same characteristic. It's quite distinct from the rest of the Islas. So that's an important thing to understand when we kind of go through these whiskies.
It's a very salient point.
Yes.
Right. That was a bad pun. I was working on saline, salient. Anyway, the it's one of those things that
no, I'll use that for a little bit.
If I needed to explain it, it was never going to land. So I thought I'd go out. You gotta speculate to accumulate. Every now and then I'll hit one. I often have to be reminded that there's even peat in any of the Highland Parks. It just doesn't.
Yes.
There is something, obviously is there, but it's almost not noticeable. It just adds to that bit of depth and complexity.
100%.
Jamie got it. So thank you, Jamie, for having my back. Andrew says, never disappointed by a Highland Park whiskey, top quality, and my go-to. Whiskey Slayer says, getting lemon zest, then cough syrup, a slight peaty smoke, like eating a slice of toast well done afterwards. I've never heard burnt toast described as well done, but that's good. I like that.
Yeah, it's not your first rodeo. I can see that.
Dom's tasting note as well there is fantastic, with citrus, orange in the palate, some pineapple, and possibly a touch of coconut. There's a touch of white pepper that lingers in the finish. The drying tannins give a nice mouthfeel with some juiciness. And Jamie says, South Sea Island in a glass, pineapple and a hint of coconut.
Yeah, I get that for sure. I mean, also just on that note, not to get too much bogged down in technical details too much, but there's also, we are a partially peated whiskey. The malt that we use, we smoke 1/5, so 20% of what goes into the fermentation in our kilns. The other 80%, 4/5, is unpeated. So it is a predominantly unpeated whiskey, but that 20% is doing a lot of work in terms of creating the overall profile, creating the overall distillery character. Without it, Highland Park would not taste like Highland Park. We do occasionally, for about 6 weeks out of the year, we will produce 100% peated malt and put that in casks and put it in our warehouses. Now, we, to my knowledge, have never released a 100% peated malt, but using those casks to bring into other limited releases is something we've done. And with the cask strength at the end, you will notice it's markedly more peated. That is because it has some of that 100% peated malt in it. I think the chat is good enough and conducive enough. We don't need to do too many slides, but I'd like to just go through this quick story, just a little bit of scene setting on Kirkwall. So if you just go back one, we were talking a lot about Orkney. Orkney provenance is very important. The Orkney landscape is very majestic, and ultimately the kind of natural forces that have created Orkney have also kind of created this environment which has produced this peat, which has produced the whiskey we have. This is a thing I talk about a lot. All spirits, no matter what they are, if they are a historic spirit category in any degree, are inherently connected to a sense of place. That could be the raw materials, that could be the particular culture that makes it and the practices that they have chosen to innovate or to kind of protect in tradition. But the reason that tequila, mezcal, bourbon, cognac taste different is because it's from somewhere else. We are deeply connected to Orkney, and our distillery is just outside the town of Kirkwall. Now, anyone who's ever been to Kirkwall will probably have been struck by how unremarkable it really is. If you've ever been to a Scottish fishing town, it's quite like most Scottish fishing towns. It's about 7,000 people. It's a small harbour with some fishing boats. A ferry comes once a day. There's 2 nice pubs, one not so nice pub, one really, really not nice pub. Some limestone buildings, some hotels with carpets that need to be changed at some point. But if you walk through the centre of the town, you will come across, next slide. Perfect. You will come across this. It's called St. Magnus's Cathedral. It is a red sandstone cathedral. It towers over the rest of the town. It was built in the 12th century by, in honour of a dead Norse earl called St. Magnus. Magnus was known for his sense of mercy, compassion, and generousness. So, of course, he was murdered by his cousin and his throne was stolen from him. And then just down the corner from this building is, next slide, this one. You might think it's the distillery. It's far from it. This is the Highland Park gift shop. We are a big deal in Kirkwall, and we are part of the furniture at this point. We get our very own gift shop where you can get Highland Park marmalade, Highland Park fudge, Highland Park tea towels. Anything that you can think of Highland Park, you can get in that shop. And in the window of this shop is this. It's called the Ba. I have been to Orkney. I can translate the complex and esoteric dialect. It means the ball. They use it to play a thing called the ball game or the Ba game. It's a game of football. They play it every year. They play it during Christmas Day and New Year's Day. They play it right beneath St. Magnus's Tower at 1:00. It is two sides. It's the uppies, everyone from uptown. The doonies, everyone from downtown. If you're born in uptown, you're an uppie. If you're born in downtown, you're a doonie. And it started as farmers versus fishers, and it has since progressed to something entirely different. So if you go to the next slide. There's no pit. There's no pitch. They play right in the middle of town. And it's not five-a-side, it's everyone's in. So the starting scrum is like 200, sometimes 300 people. There's probably about 500, 600 people in an individual game. Uppies versus Doonies, first team to score a goal wins. But because you got 700 people playing, that can be 8 minutes, it can be 8 hours. There's an unofficial rule in the Ba game that if the game goes on over 3 hours, half the team is allowed to go to the pub, and then they come back and finish it up and tends to go a little bit quicker. It is absolute carnage to behold. As far as I'm aware, there are no rules to this game. It is run simply by a sense of sportsmanship and camaraderie. I was there in winter last year, and there were guys in high vis going around downtown Kirkwall putting up boards over all the windows. And I turned to my friend and I was like, "Why are they doing that?" And he was like, "That's for the Ba game, because otherwise the ball will go into someone's living room." I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. If you just go to the next slide. And this is the distillery just here. So some of the people that play the Ba game also work at the distillery. Obviously, this is like there's a lot of tradition that goes into what we do, and we are very proud of that. There's a lot of heritage and history involved in what we do. And when we go into the 18, I'll kind of break down a few other kind of key parts of the process.
I think it might be a good time to go to the 18 now, I'd say.
Yeah.
We've also got some interesting we've got a question there from Tony. Just going back to the mash bill thing a few minutes ago. He says for the peated to non-peated barley, he's asking, is it 80-20 mixed mash together? Is it the one mash bill? Because you were saying like 20% peated.
Same barley. What will happen is 20% of that is not only peated, but it's also malted by us in our own malting floors. So we are one of relatively few distilleries in Scotland still to use our own malting floors. Probably about 7 or 8 still do. I know Balvenie and Springbank, a few others. Everything that's peated is malted at the distillery. That means we steep the grain in big tanks for about big tanks for about 2.5 days. Then it's laid out in these long carpets. If anyone's been to a malting floor, it's essentially a runway, very, very thin, very long room. And it's left there to germinate for about a week. During germination, starches break down and they're converted into sugars, which are what we need. That's what's fermentable, essentially. And then it's passed to the kilns. The kilns aren't just flavoring the barley, they're drying it out. So it's a drying process. During that drying process, it's peat smoked for about 12 hours. During that time, it aromatizes it, flavors it. The barley is identical. It's just the peating that really differs it, and the malting.
I suppose the thing is the question was more, I think, in terms of, you said earlier that in the 15-year-old, I think you were saying, is about 20% peated whiskey. And I think he was asking, is that a peated cask married in afterwards, or is
Oh, no, no, no.
the barley's mixed in the mash bill
Barley
stage?
is
So you take
the barley
20%
is
unmalted or 20% peated, 20% regular malted barley, and marry them and then distill them together.
the latter. The barley is mixed for fermentation, essentially.
Yeah.
They create yes, you're right. Yeah, sorry, you said mash bill. Yeah. They create a partially peated mash bill that is then fermented, that is then distilled. That is true of the entire core range. It's only in limited releases where we start to bring in occasional casks of fully peated malt to adjust the balance of the whiskey.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's excellent. Andrew says one tip: leave the empty glass used overnight in your room, and you'll wake up tomorrow to a beautiful aroma. Marvelous. I just a picture of your bedside table with just like 8 empty whiskey glasses now, Andrew. Stephen
I'm
Fisher says,
enjoying I'm enjoying Whiskey Slayer. Lol, I was in the third pub. I think it had sawdust on the floor. Rough is being kind. Bookie's just down the aisle. That's the fourth pub. Did you find a pub that was less nice than that? But thought the Posh Hotel looked very smart. The Posh Hotel is very smart. It's been there for 100 years though. But yeah,
and
strongly recommend.
and Stephen has asked about the Magnus. Was there a Highland Park Magnus at one point?
Yes, Magnus. So Magnus is quite a common name on Orkney. It's of Norse origin. And aside from St. Magnus, who's the namesake of that cathedral, it is also the name of essentially the founder of Highland Park. You could probably take the slide down, actually. We'll get a bit more conversational. So I said before we were founded in 1798, which is essentially true. Founded is a bit of a funny word when you talk about these old malt distilleries. Founded kind of means discovered. There was probably a still there for at least a generation before that, as is true of a lot of these distilleries. When you go back to the 1790s, when you go back to the end of the 18th century, it's about 148 distilleries today. There's probably about 10 times that in Scotland all that time ago. And that's because whiskey production wasn't a centralized industry in the same way it is now. It was these different farmsteads or these different landholders had some stills scattered around the place. They were producing whiskey out there. It was like kind of a small community project. That's how Highland Park would have started out. At the time, as far as we know, that illicit, illegal, unregulated stillhouse was run by a guy called Magnus Ewanson. Ewanson's a bit of a local folk hero in Orkney. He was a bootlegger. He was an illicit distiller. He also was a church officer, so he ran the local church essentially, and a butcher. So he's a jack of many trades essentially. He was caught in 1798 and exiled from Orkney, and his operation was essentially taken over by a landowner called David Robertson. So we kind of call him the founder of Highland Park. Really, it was his arrest that kind of started the written record of our distillery. So kind of gets a bit blurry before then. So we did do a Magnus release as well for Highland Park to kind of pay honor to
because
shadowy folk hero that he was.
Andrew said in the chat there was the Highland Park Magnus whiskey the entry level for the core range in, well, I'm adding the core range, but entry level, I'm presuming that's what he means for the US market.
So it was like a non-age statement release. A non-age statement release, but it was more of a limited release as far as I was aware. Like it certainly wasn't there to supplant the 12. I think the 12 has always been like our
well, you used to have 10-year-old up to recently, didn't you? Or you still have a 10-year-old?
Yeah, no, the 10-year-old has been discontinued also. Which is a shame. It was a beautiful whiskey. I always really like the 10-year-old for being we have a really amazing distillate. One of my kind of favorite things about kind of being in this job and getting to kind of go around distilleries and talk to distillers is I always try and get a little taste of the distillate before it goes in the casks. And ours is like quite fruity, quite raspberry flavors, kind of malty, kind of minty. I think that really comes through the 10. Once you go into the 12, there's elements of it still there. It's starting to get much more kind of cask influence compared to the 10. But
Well, yeah, obviously now we're on the 18 and we've got some good notes coming in. Chella says Christmas pudding on the nose for the 18. Berry said 18-year-old nice and smooth versus 12 and 15. Lush. Smooth, says Jamie. Very, says Roger. So there's some great taste notes. It's
yeah, I
definitely
think
it's a more rounded spice, and the tannins are still there, but they're a bit more kind of balanced. I don't know if that's the way to describe it, but yeah, it is more like a mature 15-year-old. So what's the big difference between this and the 15?
so. The 12, the 15, and the 18, they all start out the same way. Essentially, the different casks what really makes it, but they're all from the same family. So predominantly it's all sherry casks. We are part of Edrington. We make a huge amount of investment in bodegas and cooperages in Spain. But we can break it down in terms of the kind of wood we use and where the barrels or where the casks are in their life cycle. So I said before, European and American oak. European leans a bit more dry, a bit more spice led. American a bit fruitier, a bit creamier, a bit more vanilla. Also, the stage in the life of the cask. So first fill casks, getting much more tannins, getting much more kind of qualities of the oak, getting much more of the kind of sherry flavors and aromatics, whereas the refill cask is much, much lighter. All three of these whiskies, the 12, the 15, and the 18, use three kinds of casks: American first fill, European first fill, and refill casks, which is basically either of the two previous casks, but they've already been used to age Highland Park. Depending how you skew those ratios, you get different profiles. So the 12, more refill, lighter, rounder, more honeyed. 15, more American oak, more kind of vanilla, more tropical fruits, more citrus zest. 18 is more European oak, first fill. That gives it a bit more dark, a bit of those kind of darker flavors, a bit more chocolatey, a bit more cherry, dark fruits, things like that. That extra maturation as well means that it's quite soft on the front. Like when you take your first sip, it's very gentle. But then it's the linger, it's the sort of the lingering palate that kind of keeps it going and has much more development than the 12 or the 15.
Oh yeah, and that's kind of echoed in Whiskey Slayer's tasting note there. Says now we're talking 18. Wow, love it. Very creamy, toffee, bitter chocolate, spicy oak towards the end. Love the complex flavors, getting different tastes after every sip. As I say, it definitely is a more mature, complex dram than the others. 18 is a more rounded version of the 12, but the flavors are much deeper, darker for me. Lovely dram. The 18 is a league ahead so far, but now I need to find my bottle of the 21 I've hidden away somewhere. You did say, I didn't read that comment out, Bob, but you did say that you had a bottle of the 21, which I think is no longer with us at the start of the chat. This one, so the 15, just because I didn't say it, is £99 on our website. That's before the 15% off, which I will tell you what it is with that now in 1 second. I'll just bring up the 18-year-old is oh, where am I gone? I've lost it. So the 15-year-old is, never mind. Do you want to say? I'll bring up the prices if you want to say something for a second. Mick, I had two baskets open on our website just testing them, and
No,
I've got four 15-year-olds in the cart, and I don't know the price of the 18. So, you crack away.
Oh, right. Well, this is so the 18 is probably one of our most widely celebrated, most awarded whiskies. I also think 18 is kind of like a magical year for Scotch. Certainly for us, I find that Highland Park's got quite a sweet, rounded character, as we talked about. So as you start to move up, as you start to move towards something that has more cask influence, it creates a really, really nice sense of balance. There are just flavors that start to get kind of eke out of the woods at 18 that just aren't present in the 12 and 15, which is where I think you get these much kind of darker, more chocolatey notes. Those tannins as well on the palate just means that it lingers a little bit longer. It really pairs really well with kind of sweeter foods. I kind of think of these as three whiskies for three different occasions. So whereas the 12, I would say, is kind of a natural entry point. I've heard the words breakfast whiskey used. I'm not averse to them, but like it's the first whiskey of your evening, essentially. 15, a bit bolder, a bit more complex, a bit punchier. 18, I kind of think of it as a bit more of a digestif, a bit more of an end of night, a bit more of a dessert whiskey, really. It's got kind of a little bit more of the sherry cask coming through, a bit more of those kind of bittersweet, dark toffee, kind of coffee notes to it as well. I think it's important to understand with a range of whiskies that people will look at the 12, the 15, the 18, they'll be like, well, 18 is the oldest, it's the most expensive, so it's the best. 15 is the second best, 12 is the third best. And okay, you're not wrong. There are elements of that that's true. It takes more time to create the 18. We create smaller batches of it. It's a more premium product. But really, these are different branches from the same tree. Same kind of core thread runs through all of them. They've just been taken in slightly different directions. The thing that really dictates these different whiskies, that's done by intent. That's we have a wonderful master whiskey maker called Gordon Motion. He's been with us for about 16 years now. And his team, whenever I talk to him, the thing he always kind of reminds me of is that each expression isn't drawn by the materials that they have in the warehouse. It's more drawn by an intent to create a particular profile. So they want to create something a bit darker, a bit richer with the 18. 12 is to remain a bit more honeyed and orchard fruits. It's what you can do with that same spirit and take it in 100 different directions with the different casks. That's really where the kind of craft of whiskey making lies. It's also probably the most opaque, most difficult to summarize, hardest to understand aspect of Scotch whiskey making. Most distillers, most single malt brands you know well have a core distinct distillery character. Where they create their different expressions, where you have really great whiskies, is because they've selected and married those casks to an absolute T.
Yeah.
So I think that's what you really see with these three different whiskies.
I like to say it's horses for courses. And leave it at that, you know. But that's really well put. Bob has said the 18-year-old is sorry, I've read that already. The one I wanted to pick up there was Whiskey had asked about Whiskey Slayer had asked about Black Friday prices. The first Black Friday sales will actually be going into your inbox tomorrow. So do keep an eye on that. And then there'll be some this is world exclusive, Mike. The W Club Premium members will get first access to all Black Friday deals next week, and one of them is a Highland Park. So that's a peek behind the curtain, if you are wondering. So the Highland Park 15, as I said, was £99 with your discount. That's about 84 or something. So good value there on that with the 15% off you'll get in a minute. The 18 is 140 with the discount. It is 119, so a good chunky saving, and you're getting 476 W Club rewards points with that, which is £10 off your next bottle effectively. So everyone's a winner. Rab has said the Linfield House Hotel is near the distillery and has over 400 whiskies with a room dedicated to Highland Park. Is that where you stay when you're on the island, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely not in a B&B. Yeah, no, there is they have an amazing selection there. If you go in, it's just a wall of Highland Park, essentially. I think it's basically every bottle we've released in the last 100 years. Yeah, it's like quite deeply ingrained in Kirkwall. And you can kind of go in and you go into a pub, and when you're like, oh, would you work? What are you doing here? It's like, oh, I work for Highland Park. Like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, that's part of like the identity of that place. It's kind of cool.
Whiskey Slayer's trying to guess the code, but that's not the code. Well, before we give any code out, come on to the cast strength. But you're wrong, Whiskey Slayer. You can try it because the code is active, but it won't work with that one. So will we come on to the cast strength? So, Mike?
Yeah, let's do it for sure. So 12, 15, 18. This is what we call our core range. I should also address a little bit more about the rebrand, really. So this has been in the UK market. This has now changed over. Turns out rebranding your whiskey in a global market is a long, drawn out and logistically tricky and complicated business. But essentially, probably the next year, you will see the transition globally across all countries from the old kind of Viking Norse look into the new packaging. It will happen with the 12, 15, and the 18 first. The older age statements are 21, are 25, and are 30. Will follow next year. And with that, also our limited releases. So this is the cask strength, and this is batch number 4. We make this in batch release, meaning it has a slightly different cask makeup each time. It's a slightly different liquid each time. We are still kind of making the same, we're still pursuing the same character with each release, namely a quite young, non-age statement, high proof, cask strength single malt, generally with some slight variations in cask to kind of keep it interesting and exciting. This is the 4th release. Globally, there's a 5th release in this branding. When the 6th release comes out, it will look much more like this. I can't speak to it too much, but it will essentially be the beginning of a new series. Same idea, same essence, but different name, different style, different bottle, different aesthetic, essentially.
And Andrew has said in the chat there that this packs a punch. I hope Andrew hasn't gone off of your advice earlier on from counting down the age statement, and because this is a non-age statement, we all have to.
You just hold it right. Well, I think that is the other drawback with that advice. So 64.3% ABV. I said before we pour into casks at 69.8% ABV. Now, when you mature whiskey, as I'm sure you're well aware, you will lose some to evaporation. In Scotland, or generally in Scotch, we call it angel share. Casks are watertight. They are very rarely airtight. Now, because of the fundamentals of the way ethanol and water works, essentially the alcohol will evaporate more readily than the water in that solution. This means that the ABV will gradually come down over time. We've got a vintage release. It's about 35 years old. That is also cask strength, but by the time it goes into bottle, it's about 40, 45, 46%. It has come down naturally from 69.8% all the way down to 45%. This is still 63%. So for sure it's quite youthful. It's not a heavily matured spirit by any means. But that is also what I really like about it. For a huge amount of what we do really leans into our age statements, into our more mature whiskies. I think we make really, really great older whiskies. But it's really nice to try something that is a little bit different, is a little bit removed from those. This does have some of that more heavily peated malt in it. If I didn't make sense before, essentially somewhere in the 50, 60 casks that make up the cask release, the cask strength release, there will be some 100% peated malt casks in there. So this is still not 100% peated malt, but it's got a little bit more kick.
Yeah, it definitely comes through more than the other ones. Yeah.
And it still has that backbone of sherry. Sherry casks is really the foundation of what we do. We have about 43,000 casks in Orkney in our warehouses, probably about 14 million litres, give or take, of whiskey. The lion's share of that is sherry seasoned casks from Jerez. But within that, there's still a small proportion of ex-bourbon. There'll be some Rioja wine casks, which we use in the 21. There'll be some PX. There'll be stuff I don't even know about. There'll be experiments. There'll be stuff that we're holding on to, stuff that's destined for limited releases, something that never has a home. With the cask strength, we have sherry. We have some bourbon, which brings more of that kind of lighter, kind of creamier, kind of bright, vibrant flavors. And we have a port wine cask in there as well. That's just bringing a little bit more of that fruitiness. You're able to get some of that fruitiness while still releasing it quite young, so still having some of that vibrancy, a lot of that smoke, some heat, but you're getting a nice bit of fruitiness, nice bit of color, nice bit of roundness from those port wine pipes, essentially. I would recommend, if you have at home, a little pipette I will always recommend with the cask strength, even when it's close to 65%, to try it on its own. But in an ideal world, all whiskey would be cask strength. You get to decide exactly your own personal level of dilution for your own palate. So have a little sip first, and then if necessary, with a jug or a pipette, just add a few drops of water.
It's given
What
it's given a lovely
go for
halo
it.
there with the drop of water. It really is. It really works. We've got some great taste notes in there, or comments in the chat
Yeah,
about the. Tony C says, "Get the jam, but more marmalade for me. No great nasal prickle despite the ABV." Nick has asked about the discount code on the bottlings. The bottling, it's currently only active on the new branding. I know there's some of the old branding is still on the website. If you really, really want to buy the old one, if you drop an email to me, I'll Luke at whiskyshop.com. I'm sure we'll be able to discount the other ones. I just need to sign that off. But at the moment, the discount code is set up only for the new branding. Although the cask strength is still in, as you've touched on, Mike, is still in the old brand.
yeah,
The discount code, I may as well give it now to you folks. It's Whiskey Slayer was close. It's WS24HP. For Highland Park, not the brown sauce, and it's great. Dom has said the cask strength is quite jammy on the nose with soft forest fruits with light toffee and vinous notes. The mouthfeel is very drying and quite powdery, but not unpleasant. The 64.3% ABV is not obvious as it could be, but there is some chili heat there. There's a delicious sweet smokiness with a berry influence, strawberries and black currants. It's fierce but very compelling with a lot of interest. Brilliant. Taste note again there.
yeah. Lengthy.
Roger said, I did like the Viking theme, but that's life. The whiskey is the same and extremely good. New branding may catch new drinkers. I'm caught, so no problem.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's really important. Like I think I can probably speak for this call and say we're probably all quite established whiskey drinkers. We probably have favorites. We probably visited some distilleries. Probably know quite a lot of the stuff that I was just kind of reeling off. But the whiskey industry is changing. We want to appeal to new drinkers. We want to kind of derobe this kind of idea that whiskey is like an old world style of spirit. There's so much you can do with a single whiskey, so much you can do with a distillery. So I think it's really important to be able to open it up without losing sight of who you are. So I think that this rebrand is doing a really nice balance. And as someone who gets to rep the whiskey in the UK and gets to talk to kind of guys like you, kind of whiskey shop consumers around Glasgow or London, and then also the kind of more high profile stuff or with bartenders and restaurants, I think we have struck a really nice balance where we are still kind of staying true to our roots as a single malt producer, but just slightly opening it up, making it a little bit more approachable, kind of removing that kind of like Viking cloak around it. I think it's been really important. I just saw a little question in the chat from Dom. Non-age statements, but can you estimate average age? So I don't know for sure. Basically, the way it works is I get a full cask breakdown of the percentages of what casks go in, but it does not describe age because obviously so much of our stuff is age statement. When I get the cask statement for the 12 year, it will be percentage of European first fill, American first fill and refill, but everything is above 12 years, so the age is kind of irrelevant. I can't speak to it precisely. I suspect probably there are casks as young as 4, 5 in there, but probably up to 9, 10 in there. So there's a wide range. You're going to get very different. This is like the real kind of craft behind it. You're going to get really different flavors at different points in whiskey maturation. It's really knowing how to use those casks to optimum effect that gets you appointed to be a master whiskey maker, I guess. But yeah, probably some of the first fill bourbon can be taken out quite young. Probably some of the sherry's probably been left a little bit longer. And in the end, they've got an average age of, I don't know, 6, 7 probably, but that's kind of a guess. That's an educated guess, essentially.
I have a quick question of my own, and then there's two great comments in there as well. The original, because this is inspired by some of the comments around the packaging. The original Viking packaging that's just been replaced. When did that first get introduced?
Not that long ago, like about 10 years.
Yeah, so it's we do get nostalgic for things that are actually not that that old. And the
Yeah.
other thing is, Roger says, "I'm old, world with spirit, and I hope for a while yet." More
Yeah.
American oak here, says Tony, which is a genuine question. There's
Yes.
black
Yeah.
pepper and heat in abundance. So yeah, this is more American oak in this bottling.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's also bourbon in there as well. So there'll be some American sherry cask and there'll be ex bourbon. So yeah,
Yeah,
a bit more of that roundness.
and
Yeah.
then
No, I think this is like a really good point as well. Also, I think the rebrands, it's funny, like from my perspective as someone who's kind of studied the rebrand from the inside, I mean, every time they do the brand, it still has the kind of same message. It's always been like, we are from Orkney. This is our uh, this is our roots. They've just gone like down like a very different avenue to get there. Um, so whereas the previous one is very much like latched onto the influence that Norse and Viking settlers had, which is apparent if you go there. There are still artifacts there. Magnus is not a very Anglo-Pictish name, but so there's definitely influence and cultural influences come from that. But then the one prior to that was more about kind of all old Orcadian native Celtic style, and now this one is kind of going to modern Orkney. It always kind of comes back. It comes full circle to the same thing.
yeah, it's still part of the
Essentially,
brand story.
yeah, essentially we're deeply rooted in Orkney, and we are kind of going through different ways to communicate that. I think this one will have some staying power, though. I think it has been a really successful rebrand. Everyone I've talked to has been wholly positive about it, and that I've done rooms of people in sort of fine dining dinners to some kind of crowded basements in Glasgow whiskey shops. So I think it's been a good range of punters.
Yeah, one of your colleagues showed me a prototype of this probably last October, last year. So obviously you guys have been thinking about it or your colleagues have been thinking about this for a long, long time. And I was very, I was skeptical when I first saw it, but having the last 12 months to kind of mull over it, I was actually quite excited when it finally came around. Because I think the plan, not to let the curtain, I think that maybe was delayed or something, because I think it was meant to come out a bit earlier. And I was kind
Oh
of
yeah, yeah, for
really
sure.
excited for it,
Years.
because we had this tasting, I think, pegged in originally for September with one of your colleagues, and the it got moved because of we weren't selling the new branding, and it's yeah, I think it really works, but I know for some people on this call it's going to be a new, like totally new, and as the comment was said there by can't remember who, I've lost it now, but maybe Bob said that, yeah, reserve judgment until he has a bottle on his shelf, and that's a good way to attitude to have. It's this time of night normally, Mike, where we get people to rate the drams they've had so far in terms of, well,
Yeah,
so far, or the drams
yeah,
tonight. So if you do, and I don't mean each one out of 10, I mean an order of preference. It's a bit of fun
yeah.
thing to do at the end of the call. So please do get them in there. And there's a few more. Just to reiterate, folks, the discount code is WS24 HP. So that will get you 15% off all the whiskies we've tried tonight. Nick says, saw a few reviews of Cask Strength that made me hesitate in buying. No idea what they're on about. Beautiful liquid. I totally agree. I think the Cask Strength's actually been my favorite.
It's
What we
you
sampled.
know 100%. Yeah, it's such a funny one. At things like the whiskey show in London, where it's devout whiskey fans, 100 different brands, I will sell out of that faster than anything else I have. But it's also 64%. So if I give it to new people or to people that are less au fait with that kind of style of whiskey, they'll really struggle with it. So I think it can be quite divisive. I think it's delicious. It's one of my favorite too. It can't be my go-to dram because it's nearly 65%. And if you have a go-to dram that's 65%, you're going to end up in the gutter pretty soon. But yeah, great little whiskey. I can't wait to do the same, but with the new pack. I think it'll be really exciting to be able to kind of launch a cask strength release. Might try and do some fun stuff around that.
Yeah, maybe get you back on here if you have enough of the old stock. We could do a comparison of the first 6 releases of Cask Strength.
Six. a whiskey tasting with 6 cask releases is going to get
It's
messy
been done
really
before on
quickly.
digital drams. My jokes get progressively worse, and so does my ability to read comments. But it's been done.
I
It's
mean,
been
I'd
longer
be
than
down
it's
for
used
that.
to.
I'll state that right now for the record. I would do that.
Marvelous. Um,
Whether anyone would hold on for the chat, I'm not sure, but for sure, because it's
but
some delicious
the
whiskey.
sorry.
Because it's some delicious whiskey.
Oh no, it's
I'm really interested to see where the cast strength is rating because yeah, cast strength 1, cast strength.
Yeah, a lot of people gone with cast strength, a couple of 18s. It's between the cast strength and the 18, although from a quick top up or tot up rather, I would say the cast strength is just edging it.
Yeah.
So yeah, and Roger said the 6 cast strength tastings were amazing. I agree. If I can't remember what whiskey it was, Roger, maybe you could remind me. That's how good it was.
That is
The
an unfortunate side effect.
Yeah, and Whiskey Slayer says for 64% and young, as you say, is very smooth. I think I might have already read that, but that's a great comment as well. So yeah, there's some great comments in there. Chris says, this is, I know you've already touched on this, so I'm just going to, but Chris has asked about the flavor profile changing with the rebrand, but it hasn't, has it?
No, I mean, there's always like very slightly nuanced changes from batch to batch. Like that is the nature of single malts. Like I have helped make a batch of the 18, and I hope that batch is really good. But it is batch production. Like sometimes you'll just get one that's absolutely stellar, and sometimes you get one that goes in a slightly different direction. But no, same process, same material, same casks, same production. We're not changing anything. Same ABV in the bottles. It's the same release. Sometimes you'll get a fucking astounding bottle from circa this year. But no, it's the same liquid, and we're striving to make it consistent and the same quality and the same expression each and every year.
Marvelous. And Dom has said, this has been a great introduction to Highland Park for me. I've enjoyed every dram. The 18 was a superb example of Highland Park, but the cast strength was excellent and just pips the 18th to the post. So brilliant. Well, folks, there are some really fantastic tasting notes and comments, and love seeing people rate their whiskies in there. Just reading them through now. Rabbit says many thanks. So thank you all, folks. Is there if anyone wants to get a quick question in the chat before we finish up, please do. And I'll just scroll back through to make sure I didn't miss it. Was there anything you wanted to share, Mike, before we finished?
No, I don't think so. I mean, just that you can always reach out to me. I'm on Instagram. I will answer any questions you have or any queries about our range or availability of our products. Highland Park Mike, just give me a follow, give me a message. I hope you all enjoy the new look as much as I do. I know sometimes people don't like whiskies to change; they like whiskies to stay the same, and that's okay. I totally respect that. But we're making good headway. We're doing really good work with this brand at the moment. I'm excited for what this might mean, certainly in the UK and beyond. Probably start doing a bit more activity. You might see us a little bit more, doing some more events in and around major cities. I'm not sure where you guys are all based, but there'll be a bit more momentum behind the brand. So I think it's quite exciting. Be able to do some kind of big dinners and stuff. You can kind of follow that from the Highland Park website. You can sign up to the kind of the newsletter and stuff, so you get all that stuff as well. But other than that, yeah, just whiskey's there to be enjoyed, not to be collected. Don't pay attention to people that say otherwise. Buy the whiskey you like drinking, drink it, enjoy it.
That's really well said. No, totally agree. And there's one last question there before we let you jump off and enjoy the rest of your evening, Mike. Is Bob said, is there a handful bottle at the distillery?
Oh, no, not currently. The distillery tour has gone through a lot of changes, so I don't know for sure what the distillery offerings will be commencing next year.
There
Probably the
definitely used
best
to be though. I remember I had one, but that was back in like maybe 2017 or something. So
yeah, so they actually had a lot of renovation at the end of this year, and the distillery tours are changing, but it's really kind of outside my purview. The best best thing to do is just check directly. Just check with the distillery. They'll be able to give you all the information you need.
Marvelous. Well, Mike, thank you so much for joining us, and I hopefully you'll come on again in the future. It's been a great tasting, as is being echoed by the comments in the chat. Our next tasting, folks, is with Cardrona Distillery. It'll be more details will be out in the next, maybe tomorrow, but probably actually early next week. And then we're hoping to do. I don't want to say much because I don't want to jinx it, but there could be a very special one before the end of the year. And then we've already got one lined up for Burns Night and early next year. So keep an eye if you're enjoying the digital drams on your email inbox. That's the best place to see them, but they'll also obviously be on our socials and everywhere else. So brilliant. Thank you for joining. And so thanks again, Mike. And I hope you have a lovely evening.
You too, my friends. There was just a quick question there. I saw Rab. Is the distillery closed? The distillery is currently closed, but will be reopened at the beginning of next year. So it's not open throughout December.
Marvelous. Well, there you go, Rob. Brilliant. Okay. Thanks, Mike. And thanks, everyone. And we'll see you again soon. Cheers.